Hi, it's Brian. Welcome to the awards contender. I'm very excited to welcome Cody Dericks back today to talk about the Best Actor Oscar race of 1974. Art Carney wins Best Actor over Dustin Hoffman and Albert Finney and Jack Nicholson and Al Pacino. Art Carney wins that trophy for Harry and Tonto. Trust me, we're going to talk about it. How are we doing, Cody?
We're doing fine. I'm interested to talk about this race. It is one of the more infamous throughout history. I think the conversation has been a little unfair in the past 50 years, but let's talk about it.
So we'll break down all of these nominations, talk about each performance. Before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the Golden Globes, which happened a few weeks before. In Best Actor in a Motion Picture Drama, the nominees are James Caan, The Gambler, Gene Hackman, The Conversation, Dustin Hoffman, Lenny, Al Pacino, The Godfather Part 2, and the winner is Jack Nicholson, Chinatown. What do we think of that category at the Golden Globes?
It makes a lot of sense that Nicholson won here. Clearly they liked Chinatown. It also wins picture and screenplay and director. And if you're awarding all those aspects of Chinatown, it's kind of hard not to also throw a trophy at Jack Nicholson, who is so important to the success of that film.
Yeah, and then I love that Gene Hackman is here for The Conversation. I'd imagine he got close to a Best Actor nomination at the Oscars, given that The Conversation got into Best Picture.
I always forget that he wasn't nominated for The Conversation, because he had just won his Oscar, but he doesn't make it, which is odd to me, because he's definitely worthy of a nomination with that performance.
I would imagine he was in 6th place. I bet it was close. He almost got that nomination. Let's talk about, at the Golden Globes, Best Actor in a Motion Picture Musical or Comedy. The nominees are James Earl Jones, Claudine, Jack Lemmon, and Walter Matthau, The Front Page. Burt Reynolds, The Longest Yard. The winner is Art Carney, Harry and Tonto. What do we think of that?
It makes a lot of sense. He's a veteran actor, although not as veteran as you might think. He's only 55 years old in this film, even though he's made up to look probably 20 years older, at least. But these other 4 nominees, I don't imagine were actually on Oscars' radar, realistically. I have to think James Earl Jones is the only other one here that probably was considered seriously, and I say that really only because his co-star Diane Carroll gets a Best Actress nomination for the same film.
So as we'll talk about, this win for Art Carney is like the only precursor, really, to his eventual Oscar victory a few weeks later. But in this category, it does make sense that Carney wins over those other 4. All right, so let's talk about Best Actor at the Oscars 1974. The nominees are Albert Finney, Murder on the Orient Express, Dustin Hoffman, Lenny, Jack Nicholson, Chinatown, Al Pacino, The Godfather Part 2. The winner is Art Carney, Harry and Tonto. I mean, it's just kind of exciting, Cody, to say some of those names and some of those titles. It's pretty remarkable.
Right, and the thing is, the 4 men that lose, you have to imagine Oscar voters, for all 4 of them would go, we'll get to them later. And they got to Hoffman and Nicholson very shortly after. Nicholson wins the next year. They get to Pacino, 20 years later, basically. And they never get to Albert Finney. It's such a shame.
Oh, I know. This morning I was like, wait, Albert Finney won for Tom Jones, right? He didn't. Finney is one of those figures in American cinema, in world cinema, really, you would think had won an Oscar for something. It's kind of crazy he never did.
He's up there with O'Toole and Burton, where you're like, wait a minute. How many nominations? He was how beloved and never an Oscar win?
It's interesting in that if Art Carney had not won for Harry and Tonto, I would have him in 5th place. Easily, I would say. He would be the 5th place person here we talk about for 2 minutes and then move on to the other bigger contenders. And so, because he's 1st place, I guess we'll start with Albert Finney for Murder on the Orient Express. I have him in 5th. What do you think?
I would agree. I think it's not the type of performance that typically wins, but he is really fun in it and electrifying, and he has a really fully formed, outrageous character who is outrageous but also respectable and very clearly good at his job.
Yeah, it's the most comedic performance of the 5. He's really going for it. He loses himself in that character. You do not recognize Albert Finney in that movie. I mean, he can be a little grating at times throughout that 2+ hours, however long that movie is. I don't know if I necessarily would have given him an Oscar nomination for that performance. I would probably take him out and put in Gene Hackman for the conversation, but that's just me. Next up, I would say, is Dustin Hoffman for Lenny. Would you have him in fourth?
Agreed. Yeah. He's the next three guys we're about to talk about are all Oscar favorites, even if they've only had one nomination so far, and yet they are all relatively young. So might explain their loss.
So as we talked about in our video dedicated to the Best Actress run of 1974, Ellen Burstyn winning for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, we really love Lenny. We love the Valerie Perrine performance that got into Best Actress, and Dustin Hoffman. I mean, his run from the late 1960s to the early 1980s is pretty astonishing. He has so many great performances, and he is a blast to watch as that comic in Lenny.
Yeah, he's really going for it with this role. And there's one scene where the camera just pulls back and you watch him do a long performance as Lenny Bruce, just bombing, and it's extraordinary work.
But he never had a chance to win for Lenny. I feel like the movie, even though it got into picture and director, it just always looked at like the nomination as the win for him here. I didn't think he ever really had a chance for that victory.
That feels like the case for all of Lenny's nominations. I think its best chance was probably in Best Actress, and I don't think she was even the runner-up there. So,
all right, Cody, now it gets tricky. Who is third place and who is second place? I have gone back and forth on this the last few hours. Ultimately, because Nicholson won the Golden Globe and the BAFTA award for Chinatown, and this was his fourth nomination without a win in just like 5 or 6 years, I have Nicholson in second and Pacino in third for Godfather Part 2. What do you think?
That's how I have it. And I actually, personally, I don't think it is that close. I think to me, Nicholson is very clearly the runner-up. He won a good handful of critics' prizes. He won New York Film Critics, National Society. He won the Golden Globe, like you said. So clearly he was really on the Academy's radar. He wins the very next year. Chinatown was very clearly the runner-up to Best Picture. I think we look back on this race and go, how did Pacino lose for this? I don't think he really ever had a chance here. I think he was, to me, number 3. And I would personally vote for him. I think it is the best performance of Al Pacino's incredible career. But I don't think he was on the Academy's radar in terms of what they wanted to recognize The Godfather Part 2 for here. Chinatown, Jack Nicholson, that's the runner-up for me.
Yeah, I agree. Although Pacino definitely had some things going for him. First off, The Godfather Part 2 wins Best Picture and Best Director and does very well in terms of wins. So that might have helped him in Best Actor. Also, his 2 previous Oscar nominations were like back to back. Like he was nominated for Godfather, 72, Serpico, 73, and then gets in for Godfather Part 2, 74. So he's definitely like on their radar. And I would assume he might have been closer to the top than we think. But it's interesting that nowadays, a lot of people, as you say, look back and say, how did Pacino not win there? When it's very probable he was actually in third place, not second. So what do we like about Pacino in The Godfather Part 2? What do you admire about that performance?
We really see him transforming fully into the monster that it was previewed who he would become at the end of The Godfather. And yet, it is not the kind of outsized screaming performance that Pacino would become infamous for dipping into later in his career. The role doesn't call for that, and Pacino knows that. You even maybe see some instances of that tendency wanting to break out, but he suppresses it. He keeps it in.
Yeah, I feel like his performance in Part 2 is enriched by his performance he had already given in Part 1 because he has such a unique arc in the first film. And so by the time we see him in Part 2, we have a better sense of who he is now, who he's starting to grow into, kind of a version of his father. And he is kind of dejected. It's not a big performance that he's often known for. The part I always think about, I just watched it again a few months ago, that part where Kay comes to the house and he walks in and he just stares at her. And the lighting is super harsh on his face. Like it's clearly artificial light, but he just looks horrible. Like they make him look just like 10 years older than he is. And then he just slams the door on her. And there is no coming back from where he's been, where he's going. And I just think Pacino in this movie, it's just an all-timer performance. He's incredible. And then let's talk about Jack Nicholson in Chinatown. What do we love about this performance?
My favorite moment from this performance, which is a movie that is completely centered around him. The camera is basically locked on Jack Nicholson's character as he journeys through this twisty mystery in 1930s LA. And yet, my favorite part of his performance is the moment when Faye Dunaway's character is shot at the very end of the film, and he is just shell-shocked. He has this expression on his face that's hard to describe. It's kind of shock and resignation and anger and sadness all at once, and he's not saying anything. It's so powerful.
Yeah, this is one of Jack Nicholson's more subtle performances, kind of like with Pacino. When we think of Nicholson, we think of big, sometimes over the top, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Batman, As Good as It Gets. And Chinatown, it is a much more reserved performance. And I love that Jack Nicholson was so comfortable to have a bandage over his nose for like an hour of the movie.
Right.
I feel like other actors might have said no to that, or like, oh, can we maybe shorten the runtime for this part? And he's like, put on the bandage, go for it. It's a great performance. Okay, Cody, we have been delaying this far enough. We have to talk about the winner of Best Actor at the Oscars, 1974, Art Carney for Harry and Tonto. What do we think of this performance and this win?
Thank you for asking it in that way, because the performance and the win are two discussions that don't really get separated anymore when people talk about this Best Actor win. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. He's playing technically older than he actually is, so there's some affectation of age there that is not how he moves through the world naturally, unless it was a really tough 55 years for Art Carney. It may have been, I don't know. It's just kind of a movie about him going through the country and meeting different people with his cats and, remarking on the changing ways of the world, things that a lot of movies at this time were doing, when you got to figure people who were there at the basically like not the beginning of filmmaking, but the golden age, are now aging into their elderly years and are looking back within their films. Is it a good performance? I think it is. Is it an Oscar-worthy performance? That's a separate conversation. I don't think this performance should be anywhere near the Academy Awards. I don't think there's a moment in the film that makes me think that's some of the best acting of the year in any year. It's, again, not his fault. If he did anything more or bigger or called upon greater emotions than were required, it would be a betrayal of the character in the film.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I liked his performance fine. This is the one movie in this lineup I had never seen before. I watched it 2 days ago. And I'm watching this movie and I'm like, if this film had not gotten any Oscar nominations and I just came across it as a 1974 film I'd heard some good things about, I think I would have appreciated it more in a way, because it is a nice movie in some ways and he is doing good work. But it's just that he wins the Best Actor Oscar over these titans, like some of these incredible performances. And that's what makes it kind of odd. Because, as you said, there isn't any moment in the movie where you say, his acting in this scene is really spectacular. Like, there's nothing in that regard that really impresses you. It's just a nice performance. As you said, he does what he's required to do. But there aren't any moments where I was like, damn, like this is really fantastic. I think this win goes beyond the performance. I think some other things were playing factors here. So let's go through why Art Carney won. I think number one is that he's a man in his 50s playing a man in his 70s. And that's kind of impressive. Watching the movie, I assumed he was around 70. And when I read he was 54, 55 when he shot it, that was kind of amazing. I was like, what? He really does feel believable as a man in his 70s. I think a big one is the whole movie, Cody, is him. This is his story. I don't think there's a scene he's not in. You follow this man on a long journey across the country. He is in every second, basically, of this movie. Whereas I think you could turn to Godfather Part 2 and see Al Pacino as only being half the movie. Robert De Niro is kind of the other half. And I mean, Nicholson is in a lot of Chinatown. That one you can't really deny. But I just feel like Art Carney, in a way, is in the most of his movie, so that might have helped him too. The other big reason, Cody, I think he won is that he was a huge star in television. He won Emmys for The Honeymooners and The Jackie Gleason Show. He was all over television screens for years, decades. By the time we get to the mid-70s, I feel like people really love Art Carney, they appreciate him, and something that might have helped him win here is the recognition that this might be the only chance we have to give him an Oscar, whereas Pacino and Hoffman, and especially Nicholson, are going to win soon. I do think that might have played a role here too. For all of those reasons, I mean, it kind of makes sense to me, even though 50 years on, it's a little bit silly that he beat out some of these all-timer iconic performances. Art Carney's Oscar win for Harry and Tonto is not the worst thing that's ever happened at the Academy Awards, okay?
We've seen worst wins in our lifetime in this category, so...
There have been worse, I would say, in the last 10 years, 20 years easily. So, Cody, what are your final thoughts about Best Actor at the Oscars 1974 and Art Carney's win for Harry and Tonto?
I do think Art Carney is my clear number 5 in this category. I don't think it's one of the worst Oscar wins of all time, especially in Best Actor, which gets it wrong so frequently. Obviously, Pacino and Nicholson are giving all-timer performances. Either one would have been wonderful first Oscars for them. Art Carney won instead, and now we get to talk about it forever as one of the great injustices in the Academy Awards history, which is why we do it, really, at the end of the day. So, thank you, Academy, for giving Art Carney this Academy Award.
Yeah. Academy, you make things interesting. I'll give you that. I mean, people who looked at these 5 films and these 5 performances and checked off Carney, it's a little bit crazy to me, honestly. But I'm also not, super mad about it. It's okay, because most of these guys did end up winning for other films eventually. It really comes down to Al Pacino's one Oscar should be for this, and not for Scent of a Woman. I think people get upset about that. But there's so much Oscars history now, Cody, almost 100 years now, and occasionally they're going to get it wrong. It's okay. It happens. Art Carney is fine in Harry and Tonto. It's not a great win, but ultimately, I'm happy he had an Oscar victory in his long career, and it's not the worst that's ever been. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and let me know in the comments below, what do you think of Best Actor at the Oscars 1974 and that win for Art Carney? We'll see you next time at the Awards Contender.